The painter Gino Parin lived in the port city of Trieste before and during the rise of Italian fascism. Born Jewish, he converted to Catholicism. When Nazi Germany occupied Trieste, Parin was arrested and deported to a concentration camp in Germany, where he died. In this series, we encounter a life full of nuance and complications during the upheavals of the early 20th century.
Episode 8, Bergen-Belsen.
While hundreds of concentration and labor camps existed in Germany during the Holocaust, one stands out for our story.
And that is Bergen-Belsen, the concentration camp where Gino Parin died.
In the spring of 1945, Bergen-Belsen dramatically changed and became a death trap for thousands of prisoners, buried in mass graves. But this is not why Parin perished in this camp.
How did Parin die then? How did the camp change?
Before we can answer these questions, let us go back a few years.
Bergen-Belsen was first constructed as a POW camp for Belgian and French soldiers in 1940. It rapidly expanded with Nazi Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union in the summer of 1941. By the fall of 1941, it kept more than 20,000 Soviet prisoners of war, most of whom perished of disease and starvation.
In 1943, the SS opened another section at Bergen-Belsen, a special holding camp for a few thousand so-called privileged Jews.
These were Jewish prisoners who were highly valued by Nazi Germany.
Why is that?
These Jewish prisoners, Parin among them, came from neutral countries like Switzerland or Anglo-Saxon countries like the United Kingdom.
Interesting. I'm getting the sense that this camp was different from other German camps.
Yes, that's right. The primary goal of the SS at Bergen-Belsen was to intern these prisoners until they could be exchanged for German prisoners kept by the Allies.
Were these prisoners treated differently than POWs?
In the beginning, conditions were livable. There were also no forced labor or mixing with common criminals and political prisoners.
Oh, that is different from what I've heard about concentration camps before.
Well, despite the special nature of Bergen-Belsen, Gino Parin died on June 9th, 1944. The circumstances surrounding his death are still a bit of a mystery. He most likely died of stomach cancer or internal hemorrhaging.
A German death certificate kept in Bad Arolsen archive lists his death as Magenblutung, gastric hemorrhaging.
Was Parin sick before he arrived in Bergen-Belsen? Did his arrest aggravate his ailments? Was the rapid decline of his health due to the camp's conditions?
We may never know.
The transport left the Fossili prison in Italy on May 16, 1944, and traveled for several days across war-torn Germany to Bergen-Belsen. It must have been harsh.
There is actually an amazing story about this transport that has been told for a long time in Gino's family after the war.
We heard it first from Christine Labastille, the great-granddaughter of Parin. She currently lives in New Jersey.
In a conversation over Zoom, Christine told us how the Parin family recalled what happened on the train to Bergen-Belsen.
When Gino was arrested and taken away by train, Christine told us, they stopped at a place where the train tracks had been bombed. The train was just sitting there, not moving. Some female German railroad workers, so the story goes, cut a hole in the floor of the freight car and pulled out a Swiss woman and her baby. They were saved. But Gino couldn't escape the same way because he was too ill and knew he wasn't going to live.
That is quite a story, especially with German women cutting a hole from below to rescue Jewish prisoners.
It later turned out, though, that the story wasn't true.
But some of Parin's relatives seemed to believe it for a long time.
Like Christine. She first believed it. But then she discovered it was a part of family lore. This rescue never happened.
It's still a good story.
Just not a very realistic one.
However, there was one rare and true story about two Swiss prisoners in Bergen-Belsen.
Who were they?
Remember Helene and Vittoria Spearer? They had been arrested with Parin in Trieste in 1944. Together with Parin, they were taken on the same transport to Bergen-Belsen in May. Helene and Vittoria were released in July. The SS escorted them to Basel in Switzerland to safety, and they survived.
If only that could have happened to Gino, too.
In April 1945, many of the remaining exchange Jews from neutral countries were sent away from Bergen-Belsen via train to freedom.
Back to the transformation of Bergen-Belsen.
Yes? What happened?
Toward the end of the war, a huge influx of newly arriving prisoners made the conditions of the camp intolerable. It became the camp that today so many people associate with Anne Frank.
Anne Frank had arrived in Bergen-Belsen from Amsterdam in November 1944, 5 months after Parin's death.
Thousands of surviving Jewish inmates from concentration and labor camps further in the east poured into Bergen-Belsen. With the rapid advance of the Soviet army, Nazi Germany forced the remaining prisoners on death marches across the winter months of 1944 to 1945.
As a result, Bergen-Belsen became overcrowded, with hunger and typhus raging among the prisoners.
Among those who died of typhus was 15-year-old Anne Frank.
The camp was designed to hold 4,000 people, but reached roughly 60,000 at its peak in 1944. Conditions were horrible. There was no sanitation, food, or medical service.
No wonder people couldn't survive there for long.
The British Army took photos of piles of corpses when it liberated the camp.
Given Gino Parin's state of health upon his arrival in late May of 1944, it is not surprising he died there on June 9th.
What happened to Parin's body?
We don't know. We have to assume that he was buried in a mass grave, perhaps cremated.
But we're not sure.
We heard something about a watch.
Oh yes, Gino's son, Edgar, received his dad's watch from the International Red Cross. After the liberation of the camp, the International Red Cross took care of the prisoners' slow recovery, records, and repatriation.
And just like that, Gino Parin's rich and complicated life ended wretchedly in the dreary place of Bergen-Belsen, far away from the sparkling, cosmopolitan city of Trieste.